How therapy helps scapegoat survivors think what used to be unthinkable. Do you wonder what the goal of all of this narcissistic abuse recovery is? When you think about your past as a scapegoat child, do you get enveloped by what it was like? And is it confusing how to mesh life today with how tense, scary, and lonely it used to be? Survivors of any form of overwhelming danger will have psychological leftovers to deal with. When our minds and bodies are faced with a situation that outstrips our coping resources at the time, we get spun into figuring out how to survive it should it happen again. And this can lead to repetitive thinking about what happened in an effort to understand the trauma so that it can be planned for accordingly. Life can feel like it cannot go on until a remedy for such a danger is found. The two such dangers experienced by the scapegoat child are first, not being known and loved for who they uniquely are by their parent, and two, not having their love valued by their narcissistic parent. These experiences are devastating to any child when they occur. It is what leads to feeling like nobody to no one. The child cannot change the way their narcissistic parent treats them, though. The child adapts by unconsciously excusing the offense committed by their parent so that they can stay attached to them. This involves forming unconscious beliefs that essentially claim the child does not deserve better. In this situation, the scapegoat child is on their own to figure out what is happening. If they had another parent who loved them and valued their love, then it would not be so bad. The child could talk with this parent about how they are being mistreated. Assuming the other parent validated the child's experience, the child could make sense of the trauma they are enduring without having to blame themselves. They could hold the narcissistic parent responsible for mistreating them because they have another viable relationship which they could rely on. Again, hypothetically. Too often, the child thrust into the role of scapegoat does not have this option. This child must understand the dangers they are being subjected to by the parent while staying attached to that same parent. In today's video, I describe one of the outcomes of healing from narcissistic abuse as a scapegoat survivor. In therapy, the survivor receives validation of their past experiences. It is not just the content of what the survivor is free to think, but the process in which it happens in therapy. As a good working relationship develops between therapist and survivor, there is a new secure base from which to explore and understand the past. The scapegoat survivor is more free to think about the dangers they experienced without blaming themselves. All of this can lead to the survivor gradually knowing the dangers they endured in childhood without getting consumed by those memories. This becomes part of the story of one's life that has already been written. The trade-off is that the pages today and in the future get to hold more promise for the survivor. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in helping survivors of narcissistic abuse reclaim the quality of life that they deserve. And I'm excited to let you know about a new opportunity to further your recovery from narcissistic abuse. It's called the Rise and Reclaim Healing Toolkit for Scapegoat Survivors. And in it, you'll receive my book called Growing Up as a Scapegoat Child to Narcissistic Parents, A Guide to Healing. And you'll get a worksheet that offers a structured approach to organizing your recovery process by focusing on key areas of healing each month. And third, you'll receive the Quick Guide to Recovery from Narcissistic Abuse, which offers a concise, easy to follow guide that outlines the essential steps to start your recovery and regain control of your life. And you can find the link to the toolkit in the description box below. Pain is not inherently bad. Isolation is. Well, one of my favorite quotes in the field of sort of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, is by a psychoanalyst named Robert Stollerow. And he writes, injurious childhood experiences in and of themselves need not be traumatic, or at least not lastingly so. Pain is not pathology. It is the absence of adequate attunement to the child's painful emotional reactions that renders them unendurable and thus a source of traumatic states and psychopathology. I'll put the reference to that quote in the description box below as well. What it means is that the scapegoat child's experience of being devalued, deprived, and controlled by their narcissistic parent becomes overwhelming when they have no one to understand it with. This happens when other adults in the child's life turn a blind eye to how the child is being mistreated. When a narcissistic parent scapegoats a child, they are displacing their own sense of worthlessness onto that child. It's as if the child is told, here, take this foul tasting piece of food in your mouth. And if the child has someone else there for them, then they can safely spit the food out and tell that person how bad it tasted. But if not, then the child must swallow it. So at that point, this piece of food or the parent's worthlessness it symbolizes is now an alien and nauseating part of them. The child can confuse the noxious food they were forced to swallow and then the ensuing stomach pain with who they are as people. After all, when we are occupied with pain, it is hard to pay attention to anything else. Plus, the child is pressured to be who their narcissistic parent will recognize them as. Identifying with the cast-off feelings of worthlessness that their parent forces them to swallow makes them recognizable to this parent. The scapegoat child does this by unconsciously adopting beliefs of being defective and or undeserving. Why being left alone with pain makes it hard to think about. The child in this position has to push their awareness of the painful feelings they have to swallow into their unconscious. They must cope with the contradiction that the person they most need to love them is emotionally exploiting them. For the child to do this, they have to create separate states in their mind that hold the different pieces of information about their parent. So one state, often the most conscious, knows that their parent is loving and good. Another state knows that their parent deprives, devalues, and controls them. The process of dissociation kicks in so that each of these states exist without impinging on the other. Without another person to talk about what's happening, these separate states can get concretized. The scapegoat child and survivor can experience an ongoing sort of discontinuity in their experience. When awareness of their parents' malevolence surfaces, it can feel jarring and disruptive because this flies in the face of the mom or dad is good state that they must usually occupy. There's no way to resolve this without another person to talk to. Put another way, these are thoughts that cannot be thunk without another person. How therapy helps scapegoat survivors think about the unthinkable. Therapy offers scapegoat survivors an ongoing relationship where they are objectively safe to bring the contradictory states mentioned earlier into their awareness. And I say objectively because it typically feels unsafe to do this at the start of treatment. Too much has been riding on keeping the two states separate from each other. From the standpoint of a form of therapy called control mastery theory, which I'm partial to, scapegoat survivors have unconscious but wise ways of gradually learning if they are now safe to say and know what used to be forbidden as a child. They see if the therapist is psychologically built the same way as their parent. Specifically, they test whether they must see themselves as defective and undeserving to keep the therapist willing to be there for them. For example, a scapegoat survivor may have just received a promotion at work. Maybe they mention this in passing to their therapist and emphasize that they did not really deserve it. If the therapist says nothing, then the survivor could conclude that they need to keep presenting themselves as defective to this therapist. If the therapist, though, talks about the survivor's devaluation of their accomplishment and wonders with the client about why this feels necessary to do, then the survivor has evidence that they do not have to appear defective to be in relationship to their therapist like they once had to with their narcissistic parent. And these ways of testing whether they must adhere to ideas of being undeserving and defective tell the survivor how safe they are, or maybe not, with the therapist. The more the therapist passes these tests, kind of in the way I just described, the safer the survivor, scapegoat survivor, grows to feel in the therapy. And with the gradual increase in experienced safety comes an increase in the ability to think about their dueling perceptions of their narcissistic parent. Doing so is no longer as dangerous as it once was, since they can trust and rely upon the therapist to be there with them. And this goes to one of, I think, the really neat things about control mastery theory. Typically when we think of therapy, you kind of think, well, you talk to someone and then the therapist kind of uncovers something that's happening now which relates to your past. And in psychology, they call that an insight. What the founders of control mastery theory found in their research is that often insights are not what leads to change or for clients to get better. It's the experience of safety that happens first in the treatment, and then insights follow from that sense of safety. It's kind of involved to get into how they studied this, but it's pretty cool, I think, and I thought it was worth mentioning. So with that said, when the scapegoat survivors sort of at this juncture with their therapist where they do feel more safe, now the awareness of their parents' mistreatment of them grows to feel less disruptive. The scapegoat survivor has a relationship with their therapist within which they feel safe. With this as a new foundation, it can feel a lot less scary to think about the negative parts of their parent. It is exactly what and who they did not have when enduring their childhood as their parent's scapegoat. So let's illustrate this with a fictional and therefore anonymized case example. Sam came to therapy in his early 20s, complaining of high anxiety and periodic bouts of depression. He was unsure why he felt this way, too. He told his therapist that he was probably just wound too tight in their first session. His therapist asked him what it was like in his family growing up. Sam said, "Well, I got yelled at a lot, but that was because I was always up to no good." His therapist said, "No good, huh? How so?" And Sam said, "Well, I was always rushing through chores just to go play with my friends. My father had to come see if I had done them right, and he'd get angry with me for being in such a rush. He'd tell me I didn't care about him or the family, and that felt really bad, but I mean, it's obviously what I deserved." His therapist registered how domineering and unreasonable his father's expectations of Sam seemed to be. He also knew that this was currently kept out of Sam's conscious awareness. His therapist assumed that Sam would need to feel a greater sense of safety in the therapy before he could productively question his father's treatment of him. And that's exactly what happened. Sam would watch his therapist's reaction when he told stories about how his father would justify his abusive treatment of Sam. When Sam detected compassion and protectiveness in his therapist's reaction, he had information that he was as deserving as anyone else. And this information could be safely assumed with his therapist. Over time, this led to Sam feeling more trust towards his therapist. He knew that he could safely express how unfairly he was treated. Initially, this brought a groundswell of distress for Sam. He would often feel disoriented and even depressed after sessions. But as they continued to work together, these thoughts grew easier and easier to entertain for Sam. He no longer had to dissociate from what he knew about his father. He had a new relationship with his therapist that did not require him to dissociate. Sam knew this because of how his therapist had passed his tests of whether he had to be defective in their relationship. Well, so growing up as a scapegoat child in these kinds of conditions where there's no one to help you make sense of what's going on can kind of lead to incredible amounts of internal tumult that can be one can risk feeling lost in. And today, my hope for today's video is that it might shed some light on how and why that comes to be, but also the opportunity for growth and eventual healing by trying to make sense of what happened with someone else, a therapist, today. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, and again, for your continued support of this channel and the resources that surround it, and to each other in the comments section and other places as well. So from Brizo back there, myself, we look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.